Death does not have the final word over us. You do. And that there's life beyond this life. We take hope in all these things. And so, Father, as we turn our attention to your word in this time that we have together, would you guide us into it? Would your Holy Spirit be very active amongst us this morning? May this truth transform us. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. So today is also a special Sunday because this is our Falling into Rhythm Sunday. Now, falling into rhythm is for our families, and so after this service, we're going to have, it's going to be over in the Activity Center. We invite our families to go over there, and we're going to talk about, there'll be some stuff on family peacemaking, family devotions. It'll be well worth your time. So there will not be a sermon discussion as we've done throughout the summer. I'm going to be over there taking part in that as well, and I hope to also gain some good thoughts and insights and truth from that time after the service today. So please join us over there. You're welcome to come over. This is kind of the tail end of a series on called Faithful Strangers, where we'll be looking at the life of Daniel, and as we examine his life, asking the question, how can we also live faithfully right where we're at? How can we live as exiles in a strange land and yet live a holy life the way Daniel and his friends lived? So we are at the very end of that series. We are in the last part of Daniel in the lion's den. So I would invite you to grab a Bible. If you don't have one, there should be one in front of you in the seats, and turn to Daniel chapter 6. Daniel chapter 6. One of the things I love about fall, and I know it's coming, you know, we're right there on the cusp of it, is apple picking. I love orchards. I also like corn mazes. Do you all like corn mazes? You know, I've been to a number of corn mazes, and many of them are designed with kids in mind. You know, no one's going to come out crying from the corn maze. You know, you walk in, you have a nice little 5-minute jaunt with your child, and everybody walks out with smiles because you made it through and you feel good about yourself. Well, a number of years ago, I went to this one in Plainfield, Wisconsin, you know, and it was intense. Now, I don't have a picture of what it was, but I just kind of want to show you the kind of corn maze I found myself in. You know, it was kind of like that. You know, I don't think there's any cool thank you farmers in the middle, you know, and it wasn't sponsored by Culver's, but I know it was intense. And I walked in and I was like, we're going to conquer the maze. And about an hour later, I probably lasted about an hour, you know, there was like these exits on the side, like give up exits, you know, like, are you done? Did we beat you? Here's how you get out, the exit. And after about an hour, I thought, I need a break, you know. And do you remember this, Christy, that crazy maze? You remember this? Yeah, it was nuts. So I took the exit, and they had like a little shelter. I think there's a shelter here, too, at the very bottom. You see this little building. But they had a shelter next to the maze, and I went into the shelter, and people were kind of sitting there, also looking defeated like me. And they had this map of the maze in the shelter. And I thought to myself, well, I'm just going to take my phone out and take a picture of that, you know, and then I'm going to get through it. I'm going to brag to everybody that I made it, you know. But I thought, I can't do that. That would be cheating, you know. So I studied the map as best I could. I kind of looked at it and I thought, I'm going to get through this, you know, and here's where you turn, you know. And so now, armed with new knowledge, I started to go through the maze again. I think some of the other people in my party gave up for good that day. But I thought, I'm going to get through it, and I'm going to be able to tell people I made it through. So about another half an hour, 45 minutes later, I keep hitting dead ends. You know that feeling where you're like, I know I haven't come this way before, you know? And there's just like a barrier. Like you can't go any further. Like turn around and find your way 10 minutes back to where you were before. You know, and at that point, I'm like, I'm out. You know, when I came across that last barrier after that long walk, I thought, this maze wins. I am leaving. I'm taking the exit. I'm done, you know. Well, I want to talk about prayer today and Daniel's prayer life. And I want to kind of acknowledge something that I think we all feel. And that's this, that there are very real barriers to a healthy prayer life. There are things blocking us from praying the way we would like to pray. And it can be frustrating. And we can feel like giving up. For Daniel, that barrier was a law of the Medes and Persians, which cannot be revoked. And that law was, you must only pray to the king for a period of 30 days. That was the barrier. Now, fortunately, we live in a country where we don't have the barrier to our personal prayer life. We are not restricted in that sense. There may be some other restrictions, and certainly we have laws governing prayer in different areas, but certainly in our own personal prayer life, we have freedom. But I would suggest that we have other barriers that we encounter to having a healthy, consistent prayer life. Let me share some of the ones that I hear most often, and even some of the ones that I see coming up in my own life. One of the barriers I think many of us find is that we are so busy and we don't have time. And yet I recognize, like everybody else, that Daniel had the same amount of hours in the day that I have. I think there's still 24-hour days. I don't think that changed over the years between Daniel and us. And yet we like to say, oh, I'm so busy. I say it, we say it. But I don't think that's I don't think any of these are actually legitimate barriers. What's interesting though is, in the same breath that we would say, I'm so busy, and prayer feels like this thing that's keeping me from being productive and getting on with my day, at the same time we'd say that, number two comes into play, and we've got to admit that we do have time for entertainment and our hobbies. Somehow we do find time to build into our day for us. I mean, maybe the whole category number two could just say Netflix, you know? Netflix is a barrier because those stinking shows, they come on, and then after the show is over, it kicks on the next episode, and then the next one, and then the next one. It's like this automatic thing they built in to pull you in. How do I know that? I don't know. I don't know. And eventually, on my screen at least, it'll say like, are you still there? You know, it's like, that's a good question. Am I still here? I'm certainly not thinking. Entertainment hobbies. There's fun things I can be doing. Number three, it could be the presence of sin. The presence of sin. When there's unconfessed sin, unresolved sin, sin that you are walking in and not dealing with, there's just a decreased desire to connect with God. Number four, maybe there's emotions. I know I have felt this first emotion. Sometimes it's guilt over not praying enough. Isn't that kind of ironic, you know? Like, I want to pray more and I feel guilty over not praying enough, so I don't pray more. Like, how does that work? But I've been there. You've probably been there. And then sometimes it's discouragement. You look at your life and you're like, well, I'm discouraged over these circumstances, these things that are going on in my life where I don't see God in this situation, at least not yet. And so I kind of withdraw from the very thing I should be pursuing in that moment of discouragement. But discouragement can make you say, just throw up your hand and say, I don't know. Just don't feel like it. Maybe it's a lack of knowledge. A lack of knowledge would be, how do I start praying? I'm new to this Christian thing. How do I start reading my Bible? You know, I just don't know how to do that. It could be a lack of knowledge. How do I pray? Or maybe number six, and this is probably very likely for most of us, it's just laziness. If we just are honest, it's just laziness. It's like Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane, you know. He tells Peter, James, and John, you know, pray with me, keep watch with me. Watch and pray that you don't fall into temptation. And we know Peter did fall into temptation. We know that he was prayerless. He was sleeping, and at some point it's just laziness. But those are 6 barriers. I would ask you, what's your barrier? Which one of these do you identify with? Would you add one to your list of reasons you'd say, yeah, I was walking through? And the interesting thing about this is, for Daniel, his barrier was a law. Law of the Medes and Persians. It cannot be revoked. You must only pray to King Darius for 30 days. And I love how the text that we're going to look at, it repeats that little fact, that little tidbit. This is the law of the Medes and Persians. It cannot be revoked. And I think for many of these barriers, we feel like, can't be revoked. I can't get over it. Can't get by it. I came to a dead end. Show me the exit. I don't know. But what Daniel finds, and what we also find out, is there's a way through these barriers. There's a cutting right through to where God wants us to be, which in Daniel's case, surprisingly, is in a lion's den. So turn to Daniel 6 with me. Hopefully you're there. And this is what it says. We read through verse 9 last week, so we're picking it up in verse 10. The plot is hatched. The satraps, the princes, the governing officials have plotted against Daniel. They've got the king to sign the law. No prayer. And this is what verse 10 says. When Daniel knew that the document had been signed, he went to his house where he had windows in his upper chamber open toward Jerusalem. He got down on his knees 3 times a day and prayed and gave thanks before his God as he had done previously. Then these men came by agreement, and they found Daniel making petition and plea before his God. Then they came near and said to the king concerning the injunction, O king, did you not sign an injunction that anyone who makes a petition to any god or man within 30 days, except to you, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions? The king answered and said, the thing stands fast according to the law of the Medes and Persians, which cannot be revoked. Then they answered and said before the king, Daniel, who's one of the exiles from Judah, pays no attention to you, O king, or the injunction you have signed, but makes his petition 3 times a day. Now let's talk about Daniel's prayer life for a moment here. As I was studying this week, I was thinking a lot about Daniel's defiance. Basically what the text tells us is he heard about the law, and the first thing he did was break the law. It's kind of like when you set your rules down with your kids. This is the rule, kids, and the first thing they do is break it, And I'm like, whoa, that feels very defiant. And the satraps are saying, oh, king, Daniel ignores you. He ignores your command. And so I thought a lot about Daniel's defiance, but I think that might be, if you pardon keep going with the metaphor, it might be a dead end for us this morning, because what I see in the text, the thing that ought to stand out to me and to us, I think the most, is that when he got down on his knees in verse 10, he prayed and gave thanks before his God as he had done previously. I don't think the point is defiance. I think the point is consistency. I mean, yes, he is defying the law. Like, I get it. He is defying the law. But I don't think that's the main point here. I don't think we're supposed to get the image of Daniel going up to his room and like, I'll show that king, and he throws these wide windows open, And he starts praying this really loud prayer that everybody can hear. Oh, God, forgive these pagan people who are trying to persecute me, I don't think that's what's going on here. I think Daniel's like, wow, that's a bad law. And the stakes are high. I may die from this law. What am I going to do? I'm going to do what I always do. I'm going to go up to my room at the 3 regular intervals, and I'm going to pray to my God, and I'm going to plead to him about this law and its consequences on me on the Jewish people. I don't think the point is defiance. And I don't think Daniel's praying as loud as he can to thumb his nose at the king. I think he's respectful of the king. He just has a higher king. And he is consistent in his faith and in his prayer life. So if I don't think that defiance is the main point, maybe I will talk about it like this. That all of us, all of God's people, wield a hidden strength that is forged through spiritual disciplines. Disciplines like prayer, like Bible reading, like worship, like service, all the disciplines, but we're talking about one today, and that's prayer. God's people have this hidden strength because all the satraps, they think Daniel's weakness is the law of his God. They think his weakness is his faithfulness to prayer. But what they've not accounted for is that is his strength. That's his strength. That he prays to God. And they're not counting on it. Sometimes I visit at people's houses and they challenge me to ping pong. Any ping pong players out there? Anybody? How many of you would say you're a good ping pong player? You are a formidable ping pong player. Anybody? Would you raise your hand on that? Roger, you are a formidable. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, you got called out. You are a formidable ping pong player. This is what happens when I visit your houses and I get challenged to ping pong. We'll be eating a nice meal, having a nice conversation, and then it goes something like this. Pastor, do you play ping pong? And I say, yes, I enjoy a game of the table tennis. I didn't bring my paddle with me, but I enjoy it here and there. And then they'll say, let's play a game, all right? I say, all right. And so they take me to this chamber of death. and they say, would you like to serve first, Pastor? Oh, sure I will. And I got a fairly decent serve. It's kind of a fast serve. That's kind of my best strength in ping pong. And then I get annihilated, I should be doing the annihilating with a name like mine. I should be the guy, And it's like, you came across so gentle, so unassuming. Most of you didn't raise your hands. Only Roger did because he got called out. Most of you didn't raise your hands, but I know you're out there. And then I play you and I'm like, I haven't played in months. And apparently you've been playing every day of the week. And what is revealed at that table is that you have been practicing. You have kept up your abilities and you're ready for any challengers. What I see in Daniel's life is he has been practicing behind closed doors. They say practice makes perfect. I think better, I've heard it said, practice makes permanent. It's that everyday consistency that you keep practicing, you keep praying, and when the storm comes, you're ready. When the challenger walks into your life, you are prayed up. And whatever comes your way, that challenge reveals the strength that's already present in your soul because you're disciplined. What is discipline? I had a Greek professor that was probably one of the most disciplined people I know. Gets up in the morning, exercises, studies some Hebrew, studies some Greek, commutes to work, teaches classes all day. I mean, this guy was a model of discipline. And I wrote this down, and I've held on to it. He says, discipline is doing what needs to be done, when it should be done, in the manner it ought to be done, regardless of how I feel about it. Dr. Ron Sauer. And it's that last part that always gets me. I don't need to have this incredible emotional experience every time I go to the Lord in prayer. But I must go to him in prayer. The discipline of it's important. The consistency is vital because when the challenger comes, I'm ready to play. I'm ready to go. And Daniel was a model of that consistency. It was his hidden strength, his secret strength. They thought they were attacking his weakness. They were attacking his strong side, and they didn't have a prayer. No pun intended. Okay. I'm kind of punny today, I'm realizing. I'm not sure what's wrong with me. That's a dad moment, when dads do that. It just happens. This is what I know about Daniel. He had a consistent time. It was so consistent, and the place was consistent. It was so consistent that his opponents could catch him. Now, I know there's different thoughts on how they caught him, Did they have their binoculars out across the street, looking in? Okay. I happen to think, in thinking about what houses were like there, Daniel had an upper room, it says, and he was praying. I think you're talking about a small little window open towards Jerusalem, because Solomon said people would pray towards Jerusalem. They'd pray towards the temple because God's presence is there. Daniel couldn't see Jerusalem from his room, but that's the direction he prayed. Maybe he requested a room with that view, that he could look that direction and pray. I don't think it was super conspicuous, but I think they knew his practice. And in my mind, just my opinion, I have no idea, but my opinion is I think they got into his room and they caught him in the act of praying. And then they seized him and took him. And, actually, they didn't seize him until later. They went to the king first. I think they were spying him out. I think it was an invasion of his privacy. At least that's how I see it, thinking about the size of windows and what he was doing. I don't think he was trying to be conspicuous, but he was consistent. He was consistent. He had a consistent time, 3 times a day, which again, that is an incredible thought to think I've got 3 times set aside that I'm going to pray. Imagine you heading out for lunch and saying, this is my prayer time. Oh, it's 12:30. This is my prayer time. I can't talk right now. Like how that would rock your world and the people around you. Whoa, 3 times a day. And he had a consistent place in his room, window open, right? Consistent place and a consistent posture. The posture was on his knees. I'm sure he had luxurious rugs to kneel on. I'm sure that's no, maybe not. Whatever he kneeled on was what he kneeled on. But he knelt down. Maybe for us, sometimes the posture is palms out, in a position of dependence. Maybe it is on your knees. But this consistency, the time, the place, the posture, this was how Daniel did his life so that when the storm would come, he was ready. He was ready. Now, I know some of you might say, well, that feels so rigid. It's kind of like legalistic, right? 3 times a day. It's not like a command for all. The command is to pray without ceasing. That's our command. But I would encourage you to think about this. And it's encouragement for me. I'm talking to me. Consistency is important in your prayer life. And the greatest prayer warriors I have known were consistent in their time and place. I remember talking to a family of a man who had passed away, and the kids would talk about his lazy boy chair. And every morning he was in that chair praying for his kids, praying for his family, studying the Bible. They could tell you the time, and they could tell you the place. And so before you start saying, oh, it's legalism, oh, it's too rigid, maybe we're just not disciplined enough that we don't see the value of it. As far as I'm concerned, most of us eat 3 times a day at pretty regular times, And nobody says, legalism, you eat at noon. Oh, you guys are so rigid. You have breakfast every morning? What? Come on. Somehow when we see things that are vital to our health, we engage in them regularly. So why not prayer? By the way, legalism is trusting in some sort of action to gain you favor with God. That's what legalism actually is. The consistency of our prayer life is not that. unless you treat it like that, like a Lucky Charm, then you've got a problem. Then you have a different problem. I want to transition a little bit with the minutes we have remaining before we go to the Lord's table. And I want to talk about lions. Yeah. You were waiting for this. Yeah, lions. And I want to tell you about the lion of Three Lakes, Wisconsin. So we had a house on the edge of the Nicolet Chequamegon, I think I'm saying that right, National Forest. Beautiful area we lived in. And down the road from us was a house that was notorious. It was notorious because a previous owner once had a pet lion in that house down the road from us. Now, not during my time when I was there, when I lived there, but before my time. And I talked to one of the pastors, one of the previous pastors at the Three Lakes Church that I was at, and the previous pastor told me he went over to the house to meet the lion. He was invited by the man who owned the lion. And he came over, and the lion kind of like a big dog, a big cat, kind of pawed him, and was friendly. And as they were talking, the lion was kind of walking around, and the lion at some point came up to this pastor, and the lion put his jaws around the man's legs. Around the man's leg, okay? It's a little concerning. And the owner was kind of like, oh, stop, rolled up a newspaper and smacked the lion on the nose. Like, this is just every day. I just got to deal with this lion sometimes, And nothing ever came of it, and the pastor got out of there unscathed. But the lion kind of locked down for a while on his leg, and eventually, he released it. Now, I don't know how the lion met his end. The story that I was told, whether it was true or not, I don't know. The story that I was told was someone poisoned the lion one time, and the lion was outside, and the lion's not alive today. But it reminds me that lions can be kept for other reasons, and lions are kept by kings. Lions are the pets of kings. Maybe pet's not the right word, but you can see in this Assyrian picture that the king is using the lion for sport. You'd shoot the lion with a bow and arrow, throw a spear at the lion, and the king would talk about his mighty exploits hunting the lion. Here's I think an 1800s painting of an Assyrian king shooting at a lion. You can see the dead lion already down. So lions were kept by kings. So the threat is that the lion is going to kill anyone that disobeys the king. So kings kept lions also to dispose of their enemies. Pick up the text again and take a look at it with me. Verse 14. Then the king, when he heard these words, was much distressed, and he set his mind to deliver Daniel. And he labored till the sun went down to rescue him. Then the men came by agreement to the king and said to the king, "Know, O king," this is the law of the Medes and Persians. I know, I get it. You said it again, right? "No injunction or ordinance that the king establishes can be changed." Then the king commanded, and Daniel was brought and cast into the den of lions. The king declared to Daniel, "May your God, whom you serve continually, deliver you." And a stone was brought and laid at the mouth of the den. And the king sealed it with his own signet and with the signet of his lords, that nothing might be changed concerning Daniel. Then the king went to his palace and spent the night fasting. No diversions were brought to him, and sleep fled from him. Then at break of day, the king arose and went in haste to the den of lions. As he came near to the den where Daniel was, he cried out in a tone of anguish, "O Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to deliver you from the lions?" And then Daniel said to the king, and I hope he paused for like 10, 15 seconds, "O king, live forever." He deserves that. "My God sent his angel and shut the lions' mouths. They have not harmed me, because I was found blameless before him and also before you. O king, I have done no harm." Then the king was exceedingly glad and commanded that Daniel be taken up out of the den. So Daniel was taken up out of the den, and no harm was found on him because he had trusted in his God. And the king commanded, and those men who had maliciously accused Daniel were brought and cast into the den of lions, they and their children and their wives. And before they reached the bottom of the den, the lions overpowered them and broke all their bones to pieces. And I'm not saying I like that part of the story. I'm not saying Darius was a nice guy. You can see the fatal logic of the plan. We're getting rid of the king's favorite guy here, you know. There's a logic problem there in the satrap's plan, and they paid for it. They were thrown into the den of lions. Unless you think that the lions were just not hungry, well, they got eaten, and they barely made it to the bottom. I'm not saying I like that. I'm not saying it's nice. That's what the king commanded. And that's not where I'm focusing. At the end of this message, I am focusing on God's deliverance of his people. God will deliver his people. These are the words I want you to think about before we go into our time for communion. God delivers his people. Do you ever read the Psalms and you come across incredible words of like rescue and deliverance, and you say, oh, you know, would I read that to a friend that's going through a hard time? Would I read that psalm in church and declare God's great rescue? Well, maybe in regards to salvation, but what about rescue from the lion's den? Aren't there Christians throughout history that have been thrown to lions, and 99 times out of 100, it's the lion that gets full, right? These lions didn't eat. By the way, the king didn't eat either. Kind of funny, you know. By the way, the king didn't sleep. Daniel might have slept. I don't know. He seems to be at peace. The king is not. In any case, this is God's delivering work. He shut the mouths of the lions. But I know Christians throughout history have not always been spared the wrath. Like, we know this. And so I'm left to remember and remind myself that in life or death, we are still delivered, friends. We are delivered. And for our Christians, brothers and sisters in other countries, if they were to lay down their lives and lose them for Christ, they'd be delivered safely to heaven. In truth, whatever we go through, there is deliverance from God. He may not save us from the lions, but he will still save us through it. He'll help us. He'll strengthen us. He'll give us resolve. He'll move us through that difficult challenge, whatever it is. His rescue is certain, even if he asks us to walk through the fire. Even if the furnace would consume us, he's still with us. He's still there, and he will deliver our souls safely. As I see it, and as I read the text, I see in verse 26 that the king makes a decree. And he says this about God: he is the living God, enduring forever. His kingdom shall never be destroyed. His dominion shall be to the end. He delivers and rescues. He works signs and wonders in heaven and on earth. He who has saved Daniel from the power of the lions. This is the God we serve. He rescues. He delivers. And whatever he asks you to go through, it's according to his glorious purposes. His kingdom purposes. His kingdom that will never end. Whatever God asks you to walk through, whatever den of lions you go into, it's according to his amazing purpose. And some of you, he might rescue out of the middle of it, as in like he takes you out of it. Sometimes God gives us a taste of heaven on earth, doesn't he? Isn't that what Daniel's experiencing here? Isn't it said that in the millennial kingdom, when Christ comes and he rules for 1,000 years, that the lion will lay down with the lamb? Isn't that the promise? That God closes the mouths of lions so that they're tame? And here we see it, a little taste of heaven, a little taste of the millennial kingdom right here in Daniel. That's amazing, my friends. And whether we experience a taste of heaven or whether God just takes us safely home, he will deliver us. Here's my last slide. Something you to think about before we take communion. Think about this. We have here an innocent man who's accused. We have here a powerful ruler that can't rescue him, no matter how hard he tries. We see a man who entrusts himself to God. That's what it says. He trusted in God. We see that the stone is sealed, and we see that that man is delivered. Are we talking about Daniel, or are we talking about Jesus? Look again. Look again, friends. Jesus is the innocent man who is accused. The powerful Pontius Pilate can't rescue him. Jesus entrusts himself to the Father. Into your hands I commit my spirit. In the garden, let your will be done and not mine. The stone is sealed over the tomb, and Jesus is delivered. I hope that fills you with encouragement today. That Daniel is just a taste of the greater deliverance to come. We're going to go into a time of communion with the remaining time we have together. A few words of explanation. Communion is for those of us that know God's deliverance, salvation from sin. If you don't know that, if you haven't believed in Jesus, would you let the plates just pass you by? Our teaching is the bread stays bread, the juice stays juice, but it's a reminder of Jesus' body and blood. Please examine your hearts this morning as we go into this time. I'd ask those that are helping serve communion now to come forward. These are the words of